What would you do if one morning you opened your front door to find a legal notice? Your husband filing for divorce, listing nights you spent at another man's house as evidence. How could everything flip so quickly when I was sure I held all the cards? Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. The kitchen clock read 11:47 p.m. when I finally cornered Greg about what I needed to say. He was loading the dishwasher, methodically placing each plate in its designated spot, like he did everything else in his perfectly organized life. I watched his precise movements and felt that familiar surge of irritation. "Greg, we need to talk," I said, leaning against the granite countertop we'd picked out together 5 years ago when we still pretended to agree on things. He didn't look up from the silverware. "It's late, Zelma. Can't this wait until morning?" "No, it can't." I crossed my arms. "I've been thinking about what we discussed last week, about trust and freedom in our marriage." Now he paused, a coffee mug suspended halfway to the top rack. "What about it?" I took a deep breath. This was it, the moment I'd been building up to for weeks. David invited me to stay over at his place this weekend. Just as friends, catching up on old times. We went to college together, you know that. Greg's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. To anyone else, he'd look completely calm, but I'd been married to him for 8 years. I knew his tells. "Stay over?" He set the mug down carefully. "As in overnight?" "Yes, overnight. It's not a big deal, Greg. We're adults. We're friends. I shouldn't have to ask permission like I'm some teenager." He turned to face me fully now, those grey eyes studying my face. "You're asking me to be okay with my wife sleeping at another man's apartment." "I'm not asking. I'm telling you what I'm going to do." The words came out sharper than I'd intended, but maybe that was good. Maybe he needed to hear the edge in my voice. "The question is whether you trust me or not." "This isn't about trust, Zelma. This is about boundaries, about respect." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Respect? What about respecting my autonomy? What about respecting that I can have male friends without you getting all jealous and controlling?" Greg's face remained maddeningly calm. "I've never said you couldn't have male friends. But you're saying I can't stay over at David's place. I'm saying it makes me uncomfortable. I'm saying it crosses a line that married people shouldn't cross." "Whose line?" "Your line." I pushed off from the counter, pacing now. "I'm 32 years old, Greg. I don't need you dictating what I can and can't do." He was quiet for a long moment, just watching me pace. Finally, he said, "What's this really about, Zelma?" The question caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" "This whole thing, the sudden need to stay overnight at another man's place, the accusations about me being controlling. What's really going on?" I felt heat rise in my cheeks. "Nothing's going on. That's exactly my point. This is about you not trusting me when nothing is going on." "Then why is it so important to you?" "Because—" I stopped pacing, facing him directly. "Because I feel suffocated, Greg. I feel like I can't breathe in this marriage sometimes. Like every move I make has to be approved by you first. That's not fair. Isn't it? When was the last time I went out with friends without you asking 20 questions about where I'm going and when I'll be home? When was the last time you showed any interest in what I actually want or need?" Greg's composure cracked slightly. "I ask because I care. I ask because I love you." "Well, maybe I need more than your version of love." The words hung in the air between us like a blade. I saw something shift in his expression, a hardening, a withdrawal. "What does that mean?" he asked quietly. I took a deep breath. This was the moment, the ultimatum I'd been building toward. "It means I'm going to David's this weekend, and if you can't handle that, if you can't trust me enough to let me have this one thing, then maybe we need to seriously reconsider whether this marriage is working." "You're threatening divorce over a sleepover?" "I'm not threatening anything. I'm stating a fact. Either you trust me or you don't. Either this marriage has room for me to be myself or it doesn't. Greg stared at me for a long moment, then he nodded slowly. I see. So? So what? So are you going to try to stop me? He turned back to the dishwasher, closing it with a soft click. No, Zelma, I'm not going to stop you. I felt a surge of triumph mixed with something else. Disappointment, maybe. Had I wanted him to fight harder? Good, I said. I'm glad we understand each other. He wiped his hands on the dish towel, folded it neatly, and hung it on its designated hook. I'm going to check on Lila and then head to bed. Greg... But he was already walking away, leaving me alone in the kitchen with the hum of the dishwasher and the bitter taste of victory. I pulled out my phone and texted David. It's happening. Saturday night. I'll be there around 7. His response came back quickly. Are you sure about this? I don't want to cause problems in your marriage. I typed back, there are already problems. This isn't causing them, it's revealing them. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Okay, I'll make sure the guest room is ready. Guest room. Right. I hadn't exactly been clear about the sleeping arrangements, had I? But that was fine. We'd figure it out when I got there. I heard Greg's car start in the driveway. I glanced at the clock, 12:23 a.m. Where was he going at this hour? I went to the window and watched his taillights disappear down our quiet suburban street. He'd never left the house this late before. Not without telling me where he was going. A small knot of unease formed in my stomach, but I pushed it away. He was probably just driving around to clear his head. Men did that, didn't they? When they needed to think. I climbed the stairs to our bedroom, feeling oddly hollow despite getting what I wanted. Tomorrow I'd call my mum and tell her about the conversation. She'd understand. She'd always said Greg was too controlling, too cold. She'd validate my decision. But as I lay in our king-size bed, staring at the empty space where my husband should have been, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted tonight. Something fundamental. I told myself it was a good thing. Growth was uncomfortable. Change was hard. But this was what I needed, what we both needed to move forward. Greg still wasn't home when I finally fell asleep at 2:30 a.m. Saturday evening arrived with unseasonable warmth for October. I'd spent the day shopping for a new outfit, nothing too obvious, just a casual dress that made me feel confident and attractive. The kind of thing Greg never seemed to notice anymore. Lila was at her friend Emma's house for a sleepover, which worked out perfectly. Greg had arranged it without any discussion with me, which should have annoyed me, but actually made things easier. I'll be back tomorrow afternoon, I told Greg as I gathered my overnight bag. He was in his office, surrounded by computer monitors and cables, working on some project that was probably more interesting to him than his own wife. Okay, he said without looking up. That's it. Just okay. He finally turned in his chair. What do you want me to say, Zelma? I don't know. Maybe ask me to be safe. Tell me you'll miss me. Show some emotion. Would it change anything if I did? The question stung because he was right. I was going regardless of what he said or how he felt about it. I guess we'll never know, I said, slinging my bag over my shoulder. David's apartment was in the trendy part of downtown, a converted warehouse with exposed brick walls and floor-to-ceiling windows. He'd done well for himself as a marketing consultant, better than Greg with his steady but unspectacular IT job. Zelma, David opened the door with a warm smile that immediately made me feel better about my decision. He looked good. He'd always been handsome in that effortless way some men managed. Tall, dark hair, with just enough grey at the temples to look distinguished. Green eyes that actually focused on me when I talked. Hey, stranger, I said, letting him pull me into a hug that lasted just a beat longer than friendly. His apartment was exactly what I'd expected. Modern, sophisticated, the kind of place Greg and I could never afford with our mortgage and Lila's expenses. Jazz music played softly from hidden speakers, and he'd opened a bottle of wine that probably cost more than we spent on groceries in a week. "This is beautiful," I said, setting my bag down and looking around. "Thanks, it's good to finally have you here." We settled on his leather couch with wine glasses, and for the first time in months, I felt myself truly relax. David asked about my work, my goals, my dreams, things Greg used to ask about before we got caught up in the routine of marriage and parenthood. "So tell me honestly," David said after we'd finished our second glass of wine, "how are things really? With Greg, I mean." I sighed, curling my legs under me. "Complicated. He's not a bad person, you know. He's just distant, cold. We're like roommates who happen to share a bed." "That must be lonely." "It is." I was surprised by how easily the admission came. I feel invisible most of the time, like I could disappear, and he'd only notice because dinner wasn't on the table. David moved closer on the couch. "His loss." I felt my cheeks warm. "You always were a charmer." "I'm serious, Zelma. You're an amazing woman. Smart, beautiful, funny. If Greg can't see that, he's an idiot." I pulled out my phone and took a selfie of us on the couch, David's arm draped casually behind me. I posted it to my Instagram with the caption, "Catching up with old friends. Some people never change." The likes started rolling in immediately. My college friends commenting with heart emojis and, "You two look amazing." My sister Sophie texted, "Wait, is that David from college? Where are you?" I texted back, "His place. Long story." 3 dots appeared and disappeared several times before she finally responded, "Are you sure about this?" Why did everyone keep asking me that? I was a grown woman capable of making my own decisions. "Dinner?" David asked, and I put my phone away. He'd made reservations at an intimate Italian place within walking distance. The kind of restaurant Greg would have complained was too expensive and too pretentious. David ordered wine pairings with each course and actually listened when I talked about my job, my frustrations, my dreams of maybe going back to school. "You should do it," he said when I mentioned thinking about getting my MBA. "You're brilliant. You could do anything you set your mind to." When was the last time Greg had encouraged me to pursue something I wanted? When was the last time he'd called me brilliant? We walked back to his apartment, slightly tipsy and laughing about shared memories from college. David's hand found mine as we crossed the street, and I didn't pull away. Back at his apartment, we settled on the couch again, with another bottle of wine. The conversation grew more intimate, more honest. David told me about his divorce 3 years ago, how he'd learned to value emotional connection over just going through the motions. "I envy what you have with Greg," he said at one point. I laughed bitterly. "Trust me, you don't. I mean the potential, the history. 8 years together, a daughter. That's not nothing." "It's not everything either." David was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "What do you want, Zelma? Really want?" I looked at him, really looked at him. His green eyes were serious, concerned. He was sitting close enough that I could smell his cologne, could see the flecks of gold in his irises. "I want to feel alive again," I whispered. He reached up and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear. "You are alive. You're the most alive person I know." For a moment, I thought he might kiss me. For a moment, I wanted him to, but instead, he pulled back. "I should set up the guest room for you," he said. "Right, of course." But as he gathered sheets and pillows, I found myself disappointed. Not because I wanted to cheat on Greg, I wasn't that kind of person, but because I wanted to feel desired. I wanted to feel like someone saw me as more than just a wife and mother, an office manager. I changed into pajamas in the guest room and brushed my teeth in David's pristine bathroom. When I came out, he was waiting in the hallway. "Everything you need?" he asked. "Yes, thank you. This is really nice of you." "Zelma," he stepped closer, "I want you to know that having you here, getting to spend time with you like this, it means a lot to me. It means a lot to me too." He leaned down and kissed my cheek, his lips lingering just long enough to make my breath catch. "Good night," he whispered. "Good night." I lay in the guest bed staring at the ceiling, my heart racing. Nothing had happened. Nothing inappropriate. But something had shifted. Some line had been crossed, even if it was just in my mind. I picked up my phone to text Greg goodnight, then put it back down. He hadn't texted me, hadn't called to check if I'd arrived safely, hadn't shown any interest in where I was or what I was doing. His loss, I thought, echoing David's words from earlier. But as I finally drifted off to sleep in a strange bed, I couldn't shake the image of Greg sitting alone in our house, probably still at his computer, probably not even noticing I was gone. The group dinner at Marcello's Bistro was supposed to be a casual get-together with our usual crowd, Tom and Jennifer, Mike and Susan, and a few other couples we'd been friends with for years. I'd suggested it earlier in the week, wanting to get back to normal social activities after my weekend at David's. What I hadn't expected was for Greg to show up. "Greg," Jennifer stood up to hug him as he approached our table. "I didn't know you were coming." "Last-minute decision," he said, his voice pleasant and calm as always. He pulled out the empty chair next to me, the one I'd been secretly hoping would stay empty. "How nice that you could make it," I said, trying to keep the irritation out of my voice. He ordered a beer and settled in like nothing had happened between us. Like I hadn't spent the weekend at another man's apartment. Like we hadn't had the biggest fight of our marriage just days ago. "So Zelma," Susan said, cutting into her salmon, "how was your weekend? You posted some fun pictures on Instagram." I felt Greg's attention sharpen beside me, though his expression remained neutral. "It was great," I said, taking a sip of my wine. "I stayed with my college friend David downtown. We had such a good time catching up." "David?" Tom raised an eyebrow. "The marketing guy you used to date?" "We never dated," I said quickly, though that wasn't entirely true. We'd had a brief thing senior year, but it never got serious. We were just friends, just friends. "Right," Tom said with a knowing smirk, "just friends." I felt my cheeks burn. Yes, just friends. Some people can maintain platonic relationships with the opposite sex, Tom. "Hey, no judgment here," he said, raising his hands. "I think it's cool that Greg's so secure in your marriage that he's okay with you having sleepovers with other guys." All eyes turned to Greg. I held my breath, waiting for him to say something embarrassing or controlling that would prove my point about how unreasonable he was. Instead, he smiled. "Zelma's a grown woman. She can make her own choices." The response was so unexpected, so perfectly calibrated, that I felt wrong-footed. I'd been prepared for jealousy, for possessiveness, for something I could point to as evidence of his controlling nature. "That's very mature of you," Jennifer said approvingly. "I trust my wife," Greg said simply, taking a sip of his beer. But there was something in the way he said it, a subtle emphasis on certain words that made me uncomfortable, like he was making a point I wasn't quite catching. "Well, I think it's wonderful that you two have such a strong marriage," Susan said. "So many couples struggle with trust issues." "We do have a strong marriage," I said, reaching over to squeeze Greg's hand. He didn't pull away, but his fingers remained limp under mine. "We just have different approaches to things sometimes." "Different approaches," Greg repeated thoughtfully. "That's one way to put it." Mike launched into a story about his own trust issues with Susan early in their relationship, and the conversation moved on. But I noticed Greg remained unusually quiet for the rest of the meal, responding when spoken to but not initiating conversation. When the check came, he pulled out his credit card before anyone else could react. "You don't have to pay for everyone," I said. "I want to," he replied. "It's been a nice evening." As we all gathered our things to leave, Jennifer pulled me aside. "Is everything okay with you two?" she asked quietly. "Of course. Why?" "I don't know. There's just something different. Greg seems distant." "He's been working a lot," I said automatically. "And you? How are you doing?" I forced a smile. "I'm great. Really great, better than I've been in a long time. But as I watched Greg shake hands with the other husbands and politely kiss the wives goodbye, I felt anything but great. There was something unsettling about his behavior tonight. His calmness felt calculated rather than genuine. "Ready?" he asked, appearing at my elbow. "Sure." We walked to our cars in silence. I'd driven separately, claiming I might want to stay out later than he would. Another small assertion of independence. "Zelma," he said as I reached for my door handle. "Yes?" "I hope you had fun tonight." There was something in his tone that made me look at him more closely. In the parking lot lighting, his face was shadowed, unreadable. "I did," I said carefully. "Good. You deserve to have fun." He got in his car and drove away, leaving me standing in the parking lot with an uneasy feeling I couldn't name. When I got home, he was already in his office with the door closed. I could see the light under the door and hear the soft clicking of his keyboard. I knocked. "Greg? Come in." He was at his computer, multiple windows open on his screens. He minimized them quickly when I entered. "Working late again?" I asked. "Just finishing up some things." "What kind of things?" He turned in his chair to face me. "Nothing that would interest you." The dismissal stung. "How do you know what interests me?" "Do you want to hear about database optimization and network security protocols?" "Maybe I do." He studied my face for a moment. "Okay, I'm working on a project that involves data recovery and digital forensics, tracking digital footprints, analyzing metadata from photos and social media posts, that sort of thing." "That sounds interesting," I said, though I wasn't sure why he was telling me this. "It is. You'd be amazed what people leave behind digitally. Location data, timestamps, deleted messages that aren't really deleted. Most people have no idea how much information they're putting out there." Something cold settled in my stomach. "Why are you working on something like that?" "It's for a client," he said, turning back to his computer. "Someone who needs to gather evidence for a legal matter." "What kind of legal matter?" "The kind where documentation is important, where you need proof of patterns of behavior, evidence of deception, that sort of thing." I felt like he was speaking in code, like there was a message I was supposed to be receiving. "Greg, is everything okay?" He was quiet for a long moment, his fingers poised over the keyboard. "We'll see," he said finally. "We'll see what the truth is soon enough." I left him in his office and went to bed alone, but sleep was elusive. I kept thinking about his words, about the way he'd acted at dinner, about the project he was working on. It was probably nothing. Greg was always working on technical projects I didn't understand. And his behavior at dinner, maybe he was just trying to show me that he could be the trusting husband I'd accused him of not being. But as I lay in the dark, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was building, something I wasn't prepared for. The argument started over something stupid. I'd forgotten to pick up Greg's dry cleaning, and he'd mentioned it casually while making coffee. "I can get it tomorrow," I said, buttering toast for Lila's lunch. "I needed that shirt for my meeting today." "Then you should have reminded me yesterday." "I shouldn't have to remind you. You said you'd handle it." Something about his tone, patient but pointed, set me off. "God, Greg, it's just a shirt. Wear something else." "That's not the point." "Then what is the point?" I turned to face him, spatula in hand like a weapon. "The point is that you said you'd do something and you didn't do it." "I forgot. People forget things. It's not the end of the world." "You're right," he said, sipping his coffee. "It's not about the shirt." "Then what is it about?" Lila wandered into the kitchen in her pajamas, and we both went silent. Greg poured her a glass of orange juice and started making her favorite breakfast, scrambled eggs with cheese. "Morning, sweetheart," I said, kissing the top of her head. "Are you and Daddy fighting?" she asked quietly. "No, baby," I said quickly. "We're just discussing something." Greg caught my eye over Lila's head. "Everything's fine, Lila. Eat your breakfast." But everything wasn't fine. After Lila left for school, the tension returned immediately. "You want to know what this is really about?" I said, cornering Greg in the kitchen. "I'm listening." "This is about control. This is about you trying to make me feel guilty for having a life outside this house. How is asking you to pick up dry cleaning about control? It's not about the dry cleaning, and you know it. This is about last weekend. About David. About the fact that I did something you didn't approve of and you can't handle it." Greg set down his coffee mug carefully. "What exactly do you think happened last weekend, Zelma?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, you keep bringing up your weekend with David like it's some kind of victory, like you proved something. What exactly did you prove?" I felt heat rise in my cheeks. "I proved that I don't need your permission to live my life. By sleeping at another man's apartment. By maintaining adult friendships without your approval. Is that what you call it?" There was something in his tone that made me defensive. "What else would I call it?" "I don't know, Zelma. You tell me." "Nothing happened, if that's what you're implying." "I'm not implying anything. I'm asking direct questions and getting evasive answers." "I'm not being evasive." "Aren't you?" He pulled out his phone. "You posted a picture of yourself on David's couch at 9:47 p.m. Your location services were on, so it's tagged to his apartment. You posted another picture at the restaurant at 10:23 p.m. Then nothing until the next morning." I stared at him. "You're tracking my social media posts?" "I'm observing what you're putting out there for the world to see." "That's creepy, Greg. That's stalker behavior." "Is it? Or is it paying attention to my wife's public social media activity?" "You're trying to make me feel guilty for having dinner with a friend." "I'm trying to understand why you needed to spend the night." "Because we were catching up. Because it was late and I'd been drinking, and it made sense to stay over rather than drive home." "In his guest room." The way he said it, like a statement rather than a question, made my stomach clench. "Yes, in his guest room." "The whole night?" "Yes, the whole night. And nothing happened." "Nothing happened." He nodded slowly. "Okay. Okay, that's it. What do you want me to say?" "I want you to apologize for interrogating me like I'm some kind of criminal." "I'm not interrogating you. I'm trying to have an honest conversation with my wife." "Honest?" I laughed bitterly. "You want honest?" "Honestly, Greg, I feel like I'm suffocating in this marriage. I feel like you don't see me as a person anymore, just as a role. The wife, the mother, the woman who picks up your dry cleaning." "That's not fair." "Isn't it? When was the last time you asked me about my dreams, my goals? When was the last time you looked at me, really looked at me, like you did when we were dating?" Greg was quiet for a long moment. "When was the last time you shared your dreams with me? When was the last time you acted like you wanted me to look at you?" The question caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" "I mean, you come home from work, take care of Lila, watch TV, and go to bed. We have the same conversations every day. Work was fine. Lila's doing well in school. Did you remember to pay the electric bill? When do we talk about dreams?" "We could if you ever asked." "I could ask the same of you." I felt the argument slipping away from me, becoming something I hadn't intended. "This isn't about me not asking about your dreams, Greg. This is about you not trusting me. And this isn't about me not trusting you, Zelma. This is about you not being honest with yourself about what you're doing." "What am I doing?" "You tell me." "I'm trying to maintain friendships. I'm trying to have a life outside of this house and this routine and this trap we've built for ourselves. By sleeping at other men's apartments. By refusing to let you control who I spend time with. I've never tried to control who you spend time with. You didn't want me to stay at David's. I said it made me uncomfortable. That's not the same thing as forbidding you. You said it crossed a line. It does cross a line." "Whose line?" "Your line. Some arbitrary line you've drawn without consulting me." Greg stood up from the table. "The line that most married couples agree on. The line that says you don't sleep at other people's houses when those people are attracted to you. David's not attracted to me. Isn't he?" No, he's not. We're friends. Friends who used to date. Briefly, years ago, it meant nothing. Does he know it meant nothing? I felt trapped, like every answer I gave was somehow wrong. Yes, he knows it meant nothing. And he knows you're happily married. Of course he knows I'm married. Happily married. I hesitated just a beat too long. Yes. Greg nodded. I see. What do you see? I see a woman who's looking for something outside her marriage instead of working on what's inside it. That's not fair, isn't it? I tried to work on what's inside it. I tried to talk to you about how I was feeling, and you dismissed me. When did I dismiss you? All the time. Every time I try to talk about anything real, you shut down. Like I'm shutting down now? I looked at him, really looked at him, and realized he wasn't shutting down. He was completely present, completely engaged. More engaged than he'd been in months. This is different, I said weakly. How is it different? Because you're angry. I'm not angry, Zelma. I'm disappointed. The word hit me like a slap. Angry I could handle. Angry meant he cared, meant he was fighting for us. Disappointed meant something else entirely. Disappointed in what? In the fact that instead of talking to me about whatever's missing in our marriage, you decided to go looking for it somewhere else. I didn't go looking for anything. Didn't you? He picked up his keys and headed for the door. Where are you going? I called after him. To work, to do my job, to be exactly who I've always been. The door closed behind him with a soft click, leaving me alone in the kitchen with the echo of his words, and the uncomfortable feeling that somehow, in trying to prove my point, I'd proven his instead. The attorney's office was nothing like what I'd expected. I'd imagined something intimidating and formal, but Janet Morrison's office was warm and welcoming, with family photos on her desk and soft lighting that made everything feel less adversarial. Thank you for agreeing to meet with both of us, she said as Greg and I settled into chairs across from her desk. I understand you're hoping to work out an amicable separation agreement. I glanced at Greg. We'd barely spoken since our fight 3 days ago, communicating only about Lila's schedule and household necessities. When he'd suggested we meet with a mediator to discuss our options, I'd agreed, thinking it might force him to acknowledge his part in our problems. That's the goal, I said. We both want what's best for our daughter. Of course, Janet said, opening a folder. Now, I should mention that Greg contacted me initially, so I've had a chance to review some preliminary information. But I want to hear from both of you about your concerns and what you hope to achieve. Preliminary information. I looked at Greg. What kind of information? Janet glanced between us. Perhaps we should start with you, Zelma. What are your primary concerns about the marriage? I launched into the speech I'd been preparing in my head for days. Greg's emotional distance, his controlling behavior, his inability to trust me to maintain adult friendships. I talked about feeling suffocated, about needing space to be myself, about the fundamental incompatibility that had developed between us. Janet took notes and asked clarifying questions. She was professional and sympathetic, making me feel heard in a way Greg never did. And Greg, she said when I finished, what's your perspective? Greg was quiet for a moment, his hands folded in his lap. I think my wife is having an emotional affair. The words hit me like a physical blow. That's ridiculous. Is it? He looked at me directly for the first time since we'd arrived. You're spending nights at another man's apartment. You're confiding in him about our marriage problems. You're seeking emotional intimacy outside our relationship. David and I are friends. I've explained this. Friends, Greg repeated. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a manila folder. Janet, I'd like to submit some evidence for consideration. My blood went cold. Evidence? Janet took the folder and began examining its contents. Her expression remained neutral, but I saw her eyebrows raise slightly. What is that? I demanded. Greg's voice was calm, matter of fact. Screenshots of text messages between you and David over the past 3 weeks. Photos of your car parked outside his apartment building on multiple occasions, not just the night you told me about. Credit card statements showing charges at restaurants and bars when you said you were working late. I felt the room spinning. You've been spying on me. I've been documenting patterns of behavior that affect our marriage and our daughter's well-being. This is insane. Janet, this is stalker behavior. This proves exactly what I was saying about him being controlling. Janet looked up from the papers. Zelma, I need to ask you some direct questions. Have you been in contact with David Trell outside of the overnight visit you mentioned to Greg? My mouth went dry. We've texted some. According to these records, you've exchanged over 200 text messages in the past 3 weeks, many of them late at night, some of them quite intimate in nature. Intimate. We're friends. We talk about personal things. Janet read from one of the screenshots. I can't stop thinking about last night. Being with you felt so right. That was sent the morning after your sleepover. I felt heat flood my face. That's taken out of context. What context would make that appropriate communication between a married woman and a male friend? I looked at Greg, expecting to see anger or hurt. Instead, his face was completely calm, almost sad. There are also photos, he said quietly. Time-stamped photos from your social media accounts and David's, the two of you at various locations over the past month, always when you told me you were somewhere else. I never lied about where I was. You said you were working late on October 12th. The photos show you at Murphy's bar with David at 8 p.m. I went out after work. Without mentioning it, without inviting me, on our wedding anniversary. The words hit me like a slap. Our anniversary. I'd completely forgotten. Greg, There's more, Janet said, still reading through the documents. Bank records showing ATM withdrawals near David's apartment. Phone records showing deleted call logs, though the phone company records show calls lasting up to 2 hours. I felt like I was drowning. This is a violation of my privacy. Actually, Janet said, since you're married and these are joint accounts and family phone plans, Greg had every legal right to access this information. But the moral right. Greg's composure finally cracked slightly. You want to talk about moral rights? What about the moral right of a husband to know where his wife is spending her evenings? What about the moral right of a daughter to have parents who are honest with each other? I never lied to you. You never told me the truth either. Janet cleared her throat. Based on this documentation, Greg, what are you proposing? I want primary custody of Leela. I want the house. I want spousal support to be minimal and temporary, given that Zelma has been using marital assets to fund her relationship with David. That's not... I haven't been... I struggled to find words. Janet, this is character assassination. He's making it sound like I'm having some torrid affair when I'm just trying to maintain a friendship. A friendship that involves overnight stays, intimate text messages, and deception about your whereabouts, Janet said neutrally. I wasn't deceiving anyone. I was protecting my privacy. From your husband? Yes, because he's controlling and jealous and... Zelma, Greg said quietly, show her the text. What text? The one you sent David yesterday, about me. My stomach dropped. Janet was looking at another screenshot. Greg suspects something. We need to be more careful. I can't lose Lila over this. Janet looked up at me. What did you mean by be more careful? I felt trapped, caught in a web I hadn't even realized I was weaving. I meant we should be more discreet about our friendship so Greg wouldn't get the wrong idea. The wrong idea about what? About... I couldn't finish the sentence because I was finally beginning to understand what the right idea was. What I'd been doing, what I'd been hiding from myself, as much as from Greg. I think, Janet said carefully, we need to take a break. Zelma, you might want to consider getting your own legal representation before we continue. My own... Why would I need my own lawyer? Greg stood up. Because this isn't mediation anymore, Zelma. This is divorce proceedings. And based on the evidence, you're not in as strong a position as you thought you were. He walked out, leaving me sitting in the attorney's office with a stack of papers that told a story I'd been too self-deceptive to see. A story of a woman who'd convinced herself she was fighting for freedom when she was really just running away from her marriage into the arms of another man. The worst part wasn't that Greg had caught me. The worst part was that until that moment, I hadn't even been honest with myself about what I was doing. The papers were served on a Tuesday morning while I was getting Lila ready for school. The doorbell rang just as I was braiding her hair, and I opened it to find a serious-looking woman in a business suit. "Zelma Lenore Madsen?" "Yes?" "You've been served." She handed me a thick manila envelope and walked away, leaving me standing in the doorway in my bathrobe, holding what felt like a bomb. "Mummy, who is that?" Lila called from the kitchen. "Nobody, sweetheart. Finish your breakfast." My hands shook as I opened the envelope. The words, "Petition for Dissolution of Marriage," seemed to jump off the page. Below that, in neat legal language, was a comprehensive list of everything Greg was asking for. Primary physical custody of Leela, the house, his retirement accounts, spousal support limited to 6 months, and then, in a section labeled Grounds, a detailed account of my emotional affair and abandonment of marital duties. I sank into the nearest chair, the papers scattered across my lap. "Mummy." Lila appeared in the doorway, her backpack slung over one shoulder. "Are you okay?" I forced a smile. "I'm fine, baby. Just some paperwork from Daddy's work." It wasn't technically a lie. This was Greg's work. Methodical, thorough, devastating. After I dropped Lila at school, I called the number on Janet Morrison's business card. "I'm sorry, but given that I'm representing your husband, I can't advise you," she said when I explained why I was calling. "You'll need to retain your own counsel." "But you said this was mediation." "That was before we saw the full scope of the situation, Zelma. I'd recommend calling the Bar Association for a referral." The lawyer I found, Robert Chen, was younger than I'd expected and brutally honest. "This isn't good," he said after reviewing Greg's petition. "Your husband has documented a clear pattern of deceptive behavior. The text messages alone are damaging, but combined with the financial records and the timeline of events. But I never actually cheated. Emotional infidelity is still infidelity in the eyes of the court. And the fact that you were using marital assets to fund dates with another man while lying to your husband about your whereabouts, that's not going to play well with a judge." "They weren't dates." Robert looked at me over his glasses. "Mrs. Madsen, I need you to be completely honest with me. What exactly was your relationship with David Trell?" I opened my mouth to give him the same explanation I'd been giving everyone else, but the words wouldn't come. Because sitting in that sterile office, looking at the evidence of my own behavior laid out in black and white, I couldn't lie anymore, not even to myself. "I was attracted to him," I said quietly. "I was lonely in my marriage, and David made me feel seen, appreciated, like I mattered." "Did you have sexual relations with him?" "No, but—" I took a shaky breath. "I wanted to, and I think he knew that." "Did you tell him about problems in your marriage?" "Yes." "Did you seek emotional support from him that you weren't getting from your husband?" "Yes." "Did you prioritize time with him over time with your family?" In the end, my own lawyer admitted the truth. Greg's attorney had me cornered, and all we could do now was damage control. Every late night at work, every call to David after meetings, every time I trashed Greg to our friends was laid out as proof I couldn't be trusted, not as a wife and not as a mother. Greg calmly asked for primary custody, the house, no support, and only supervised visits for me until I proved I could be honest and faithful. I signed it all, walked away with the suitcase and my car, and watched my daughter press her face to the window beside the steady, reliable man I'd spent years taking for granted, finally understanding that the freedom I chased was really just loneliness waiting on the other side.